A grandmother had her granddaughter sitting on her lap as she was telling her a Bible story. After a while, the grandmother said to her unusually quiet granddaughter, "What do you think of the Bible story so far, dear?" And the little girl said, "Oh, I love it, Grandma, for you just never know what God is going to do next." Now, this is particularly true of the encounter with Jesus we are about to look at in Luke 8:42 to 48. It's got something to say to us today because it's about someone with a chronic illness. In any reasonable size group of people, there will be some battling a condition that just won't go away. If it's not us, it will be someone we care about. And the encounter a frail woman had with Jesus has something to say about this. Now, we won't get all the answers, but we will get some understanding which will help. This is how Luke tells of what happened. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing around you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know the power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now, what we have here is a miracle within a miracle. This miracle takes place within the context of the raising of Jairus' daughter. He came begging Jesus to come to his house and heal his 12-year-old daughter who was desperately sick. As Jesus began to walk with Jairus toward his house, hundreds of people began to press in upon him. If you've ever been to the Holy Land, you know how narrow and crowded the streets are. In some places, you can almost reach out and touch the buildings on both sides of the street. So the scene must have been chaotic. Jairus on one side of Jesus thinking, "Please hurry, my daughter is dying." The disciples forming a moving wave like bodyguards for a rock star, with hundreds of eager people pushing, shouting, stretching out their arms to touch him as he passes by. Meanwhile, totally unnoticed, a frail, stooped, sickly woman pushes her way through the throng. Her arms are thin, her hands shake as she stretches them toward Jesus and touches the blue and white tassel on the corner of his cloak. The Bible is not specific about her problem, but it was a hemorrhage of blood. In those days, there was no cure for that condition, but that wasn't the worst of it. Leviticus contained regulations for women with an uncontrollable flow of blood. It was a hygiene issue, and anyone who touched such a woman would themselves become unclean. It meant that this poor woman had become an outcast in her own village. Mark includes a detail that Luke omits. The woman had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Why do you think Luke left that detail out? Probably because he was a physician and he didn't want to make his own profession look bad. That doesn't imply that the doctors were all fakes, but they simply didn't have effective treatments for this chronic hemorrhaging. They tried several cures for this problem. One was carrying the ash of an ostrich egg in a certain cloth. With cures like that, it's no wonder this woman was not getting any better. Without a miracle, there is no hope. Now, let's stop here for a moment. This woman caused the delay of Jesus. Jairus is now waiting. Imagine the distress. I guess that some of us don't have to imagine it because we have experienced it. This woman has a long-term condition. The little girl is an emergency. Some of us will have known what it is to be waiting at the hospital for an operation, and we're trying to relax and prepare ourselves for the ordeal, and then we're told, sorry, we have an emergency and you will need to return tomorrow. And Jesus will not be hurried. And the delay means the little girl dies. God's blessings never seem to come just when we want them. That's why we can feel like Jairus. This is an irrational delay. But there are lessons in the delays. One is that we will always get far more from Jesus than we expected. Jairus wanted a fever cure, but got a resurrection. The woman wanted to touch and run. Jesus forces her to go public. He wants her to move from some superstition about touching cloth to trust him. He is really saying, don't come to me to have your needs met. Come to have a life-transforming relationship. Coming to Jesus, we will get far more than we ask or think. And let me add something very important. If God looks like he is ignoring us, it's because we don't have a clue what he is doing. Wasn't that the case for Job? I mean, we often think that the story of Job is about suffering and how that man really did suffer. But actually, it's more than that. Behind that suffering is the lesson that God is wanting the devil to learn through all of this, who has said, well, of course, Job, you've pointed him out as a man who does good things. There are benefits in doing that. You just allow the hand to come off him and let me touch him in different ways, and you will see that he will curse you. In other words, the issue here wasn't so much suffering as this. Will a man keep on trusting God when he's got no earthly reason left to do so? And he did keep trusting God. Even if he slay me, he said, I will trust him. He keeps trusting. And actually, he never knew why he was going through all the pressures, all the terrible circumstances and traumas that he did go through. And for Jesus to raise a dead girl was no problem. Death is just like sleep to him, and he can wake her up. And also there is an opportunity for a superstitious woman to have her life transformed. The crowd can't see that, but it's the truth of the matter. Is God delaying something in our life? Are we thinking of giving up? We don't have all the facts at our disposal. Trust me, says Jesus. You know, when I look at delays in my own life, how ignorant I was, and sometimes how arrogant I was. Why should I know it all? I can't know all the facts. Okay, it's hard. Jesus never said it wouldn't be in a fallen world. But Paul could give a testimony to light affliction. And it's interesting, it's Paul who says that when you think of all the troubles and traumas and trials and stresses and persecution and pain that he went through, that was his life experience. And yet he says, when I try to compare that with the weight of glory that is to come, there is no comparison at all. Is getting that bigger perspective. And when we suffer, we often waste a lot of time and energy asking, why me, Lord? The right question to ask is not why, but what is God trying to teach me in the middle of my suffering? And he is trying to teach us that he loves us and wants us to depend on him. Sometimes he chooses to remove our suffering, and at other times he gives us the grace to live through the suffering. The Apostle Paul had a big problem. He called it a thorn in the flesh. He begged God 3 times to take it away, but the Lord didn't remove it. Sometimes God doesn't remove our suffering, and when that is the case, we must have the same attitude of Paul, who wrote that the Lord said to him, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. God knows suffering makes us stronger, making us depend on him. The name of God's college is the University of Affliction. And although the tuition is expensive, the classes and the degrees we receive are priceless. Some of you are enrolled right now in the University of Affliction. But let's now move from the delay of Jesus to the deliverance of Jesus. You see, this poor woman thinks, if only I can reach out and touch the hem of his garment, perhaps that will be enough. Now, her faith was mixed with a kind of folk magic, but it was enough to make her risk public rejection. She reaches out and touches Jesus. The book of Numbers specified that tassels must be sewn on the 4 corners of the man's cloak, and each must contain a blue thread, a visual reminder to obey God's commandments. At least one of the tassels would always hang from the back of the wearer. And it was this tassel that the woman touched as Jesus walked by. And she was immediately and instantly healed. Something like an electric shock moves from her fingers, through her hands, up her arms, and into every part of her body. Only it's not an electric shock, but an infusion of some mighty power with which she was not familiar. And in less time than it takes to tell it, the disastrous decay of 12 years is instantly halted and reversed, and she is well again, with a smile on her face, the first real smile in a long, long time. She turns to go home. But just at that moment, Jesus stops, turns, and surveying the crowd asks, "Who touched me?" Now it seemed to the disciples, particularly to Peter, an absurd question. Hundreds of people milling around, and he wants to know who touched him? Everybody was touching him. Jesus knew that someone had touched him in faith. He stands in our midst today asking, who touched me? I could say, Lord, there are lots of people listening who are touching you with their thoughts and prayers. And he responds, no, I mean who really is grabbing hold of my power because they are desperate. Do you know our problem? We aren't desperate enough. God says you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. If we show up and seek the Lord in some half-hearted attempt, is it any wonder we miss him? Jesus said, if any man thirst, let him come to me and drink. One of the first Christian books I recall reading was written by an American pastor, A.W. Tozer. And one of the things that has stayed with me through the years is this, and this is my paraphrase of what he said. We are as close to God now as we want to be. We are as near to him as we desire to be. It's the difference between really hungering and thirsting or a casual looking towards him. You see, thirst is not casually wanting a drink of water. When we're really thirsty, water must be had, and we will drive through any obstacle to get to it. And we don't drink of the living water of Christ because there is no consuming thirst after God. The situation is desperate, but we are not. In the crowd that day were two groups of people. The large crowd pressing in on Jesus were basically in the Lord's way. But Jairus and this woman were on the way to Jesus. Most in the crowd were spectators, but at least two were seekers. And today we have the same two groups. People will crowd around Christ in church services, but will we be the one who really reaches out and touches Jesus and receives what he has for us? Jesus is around by his Spirit. How desperate are we? Please note, Jesus asked who touched him not for his sake, but for her sake, and for the sake of the crowd. He wanted to raise the level of her faith. If she went away without a further word, she might actually believe that there was some magic power in his clothing. He wanted to assure her that it was her faith in him that made the difference. Furthermore, he wanted her to know that the healing would be permanent. And he also wanted to establish a personal relationship with her. And to do all those things, she needed to identify herself to Jesus and to the crowd. This woman had taken a real chance by touching Jesus. According to the law, her touch could make Jesus unclean. And thank God, there are no hopeless cases with him. Notice his words. Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. So the deliverance of Jesus has led to a draining of Jesus, because he was conscious of God's power flowing out from him into the body of the woman who touched his garment. Power that had been his passed from him to her, and it resulted in her healing, but the power had to go out from him first. If that happened to Jesus, expect that as we seek to live for God today, there will be times when we are drained of energy, probably physically, emotionally, and spiritually. If we follow Jesus, the same thing will happen to us. We will give, and the power will go out from us. We can help people, but it will cost us something. Not just time, not just energy, not just money, but our very life. Strength will go out from us until the lives of the people around us get their help. Do we know how to replenish in the same way that Jesus did? You remember that occasion when he was on the Mount of Olives and he withdrew from people around him? He wanted to be alone with the Lord. And he was drained of energy as he was thinking about what he had done and what he was going to need to do there on the cross. And what happened? An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. Now, if that was necessary for Jesus, what about us? Where there are situations where energy is drained from us because of those circumstances we've been wrestling with. Taking time as Jesus did, withdrawing from other pursuits, withdrawing from other people, and giving that time and focusing upon him, that can be hard work in itself. But I tell you this, it'll be a means of strengthening us. It'll be the means of sustaining us. When Jesus asks, "Who touched me?" the woman came trembling and fell at Jesus' feet, publicly declaring what Jesus had done for her and how she had been instantly healed. I imagine they were clapping and cheering all around, and Jairus saying, "That's good, now come on, Jesus, my little girl needs you." But before they go on, Jesus looks at her and says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." The word for daughter is unusual. It's the only time the Gospels record Jesus using this particular word. It's a term of affectionate endearment, something like little one. And then he said, "Go in peace," or literally, "Go into peace," meaning go from this place and walk in good health. You are healed forever of your disease. She didn't have a huge amount of faith. This story means that we don't have to agonize over the correct way to come to God. We don't have to know the Bible before we come to God. We don't even have to be a member of a church. These are good, but they aren't the main thing. Even though our faith be as feeble as this woman's was, he will not turn us away. Do we ever feel as if our problems keep us from coming to God? If we want to touch Jesus, all we have to do is to reach out to him. We don't have to have strong faith. We can have weak faith so long as it's resting upon a strong object. And who could be stronger than Jesus himself? Just a touch, and Jesus himself will enter our life. And before we finish, we need to focus on the demeanor of Jesus. The most sensitive man in all history is Jesus Christ. No one ever cared about people like he did. No one ever felt the pain of others like he did. He is, was, and always will be. As he walked down a crowded street, hundreds of hands reached out to him, yet he felt the thin, sickly hand of faith. He felt it. He stopped. He turned. He spoke to her. He was not too busy to bother with her. Think of it. He whom all the forces of hell could not stop was diverted by the touch of a sickly hand. This woman did by her touch what Satan could not do. She stopped Jesus in his tracks, and he spoke to her as if she were the only person in the crowd. When he turned, it was just Jesus and her. No one else mattered. And you know something? He loves us as if there was only one person in the entire universe to love. And he hears us as if we were the only one speaking to him. He attends to our needs as if ours were the only needs in the entire universe. What a Christ! All that touches us touches him. If it's pain, then he feels the pain. If it's sorrow, then he feels the sorrow. If it's rejection, then he feels the rejection. If it's loss, then he feels the loss. Whatever it is that hurts us, he feels it. If it touches us, it touches him. And that's what the writer to the Hebrews meant. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. Thank God it is so. If it hurts us, it hurts him. We don't have an uncaring Christ, nor do we have a preoccupied Christ who is too busy to notice our problems. Thank God we do not have an unemotional Christ who runs the universe like some high-powered businessman. No. We have a sensitive Jesus. That's his demeanour. But this story is not only about Jesus Christ. It's about us. Thinking about this event where Jesus was touched, here's a question. Which part of the crowd describes our life today? I mean, are we part of the crowd rubbing shoulders with Jesus? Or are we reaching out in desperation for the power of Jesus? Some of us may be thinking, well, I don't really need anything from Jesus today. If that's our attitude, we don't know just how needy we are. How many times have we gone to church and been in the presence of Jesus but missed his power? Are we in the way of Jesus or on the way? Years ago, a wealthy Scotsman was one of the first in his village to install electricity in his home. He paid to have his entire house wired and connected. However, after several months, the electric company came to investigate. They were sure the power meter was wrong, because it showed he was only using a tiny amount of electricity each month. The man said, "Oh, I only turn on the lights each night just long enough to light the candles. Then I turn them off." So he had access to the power, but he hardly used it. He hadn't changed his way of living. He was connected to the power, but he wasn't changed. You know, it sounds exactly like thousands of Christians. We have access to the power of Jesus, but we hardly utilize it. We are connected, but not changed. Aren't we tired of being part of the crowd that presses around Jesus? Are we ready to be like that brave woman who overcame the obstacles and reached out to touch Jesus? Reach out to him now. Reach out to him tomorrow. Reach out to him the day after that. Stay open to him in all ways, available to him in all ways, reckoning upon his presence by the Spirit. He can change us. He can help us. He can save us and forgive us. Would we reach out to him right now? And God bless you. And he will.